We will now open the Estacada Urban Renewal Agency meeting. Thank you all for making it out tonight. Looks like the weather is going to be one of those iffy ones today, so we'll see how fast we can get through this all tonight. First on our list, we're going to have roll call.
Director Hughes. Here. Director Lidkey.
Here.
Director McElroy.
Here.
Director Prokop.
Here.
Director Strobel.
Here.
Director Tenbush.
Here.
Chair Drinkline.
Here. Thank you very much, Sadie. First, citizen and community group comment. I have none in front of me. So I'll move along to the consent agenda. You've all had a chance to read over that. I have a motion on the floor.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I have a first, do I have a second?
Second.
First and second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Okay, we are now at agency business. Main Street Improvement Final Design Approval. So I will hand it over to Kurt and he can run us through this. Well, close to it.
I was hoping, but
Want me to? Okay. I'm Kurt McLeod with Kurt McLeod Engineers. So tonight, we're certainly not at final. We're at bringing concepts back till we finalize. Once we do finalize the concepts, we can prepare a final set of plans relatively quickly. We're waiting for PGE, I think will be the delay, waiting for PGE to tell us exactly what they need, although we can anticipate most of what they need and perhaps even go to bid, modify it after the bid opening to incorporate unique components that PGE may ask for. So what I brought to you tonight is I've got 4 items that I wanted to just go through one at a time. The first is the 8.5 by or the 11 by 17 plate, the color plate, just an overview. And this is something we prepared a week ago. As you'll see it in tonight's discussion, you'll see we're kind of evolving away from this, not kind of, we are evolving away from this. The concepts on this design drawing are that we, in essence, maintain the street width. We don't have any brick. We don't have any on-street angle parking. We're able to do pretty consistent street trees and street lighting down the entire roadway. We have proposed improvements from the north side of Jeremy Lovelace to the south side of 3rd. So we anticipated leaving the curb returns on the north side of 3rd. Be very similar to the way Broadway was handled. The north side of 2nd pretty much stayed intact as it was pre-construction of Broadway Street. This drawing shows 2-foot bump outs in that what we were able to accomplish with a 2-foot bump out was it would have minimal impact on traffic, but it allowed us to get ADA ramps without depressing the sidewalk. So we'll go through that in a much more detail here in a minute. And my conclusion is after going through the detail that was requested, this detail makes more sense than these 2-foot bump outs. So we'll talk about that in a minute here. The other components here is we have some modifications to driveways. We have not met with anyone from Ace Hardware, but I think there's some potential to talk about reconfiguring the parking lot to see if we could minimize the number of driveways. The 2 gas stations, we haven't had but very informal conversations with them, but we'll want to talk with both of them to coordinate driveways, driveway locations, and driveway widths. So we will still do that. Very straightforward. So this questions on the overview, and I know that don't be concerned about the bump outs. We'll talk about the bump outs in a minute. We'll talk about, well, I guess one other thing I can show you is that we had projected that on 4th Avenue to the east, you'll see there's some 90-degree angle parking to the south side of 4th Avenue. It's one more thing that we'll talk about in detail in a minute here too. Any questions on that? Just a gross overview. Okay, then the second thing I brought before you is the curb return. So if you see that handout that has the top page says Estacada Main Street curb return with dual ramps. So we can configure these curb returns to where they don't project beyond the existing, to be very similar to the existing 10-foot radius curb returns. The sidewalks would remain essentially where they're at. I've shown the 28-foot radius that was originally proposed a month ago. And the 28-foot radius is what we use for a standard for an emergency vehicle, for a fire truck turning radius, inside wheel turning radius. And you can see we're able to bring 2 or 3 feet back from that if we just stick with the 10-foot radius curb returns where they are now, very similar to where they're at now. Now, to do this, to make this work, what we're required to do is, you can see the truncated domes going in each direction. We're required to have a landing behind the truncated dome. So you can see that square that has arrows in both directions. That's flat. That's going to be 1.5%. That's the same grade as a sidewalk. So it's going to be 1.5% or less in both directions. So you can't ramp up in that 4 foot or 4.5 foot square. And then the squares adjacent to that square on both sides, those will be the ramps. So those ramps can be as high as 7.5% slope. So that's where we would depress the corner. So that corner square called the turning radius, turning square would be depressed. So that would be depressed a few inches so that we can have enough ramp length between the curb and that turning space. So the option, if we put in dual ramps, which ODOT doesn't allow diagonal ramps, the standards that we hold in this world are ODOT. So we try to have everything we design to meet ODOT standards. However, you're not mandated to. So a lot of the smaller communities, small or not, we use diagonal ramps also, a single diagonal ramp. So the second sketch I have here is a single diagonal ramp. And it's much the same as the dual ramps. However, so it still has those two approach ramps you see coming from each direction. That square where the arrows are overlapping themselves, that's the square where it's flat. That's flat 1.5% in each direction. You're required to have 5 foot from the back of that, beginning at the street. You see the truncated domes. You walk up that ramp to that solid line so that the truncated domes would be at 7.5%. That's a steep slope. Then you hit the flat portion. We're required to have 5 feet from the corner of a building to that grade break. So whenever there's an obstruction behind a turning space, you're required to have a 5 foot clearance. If there's no obstruction behind it, like in the first example, you can see you're coming up and you just have sidewalk behind you. So there's no obstruction behind it. You're only required to have 4 foot per pro WAG standards, but ODOT standards are 4.5 foot. So 4.5 foot wide in each direction for the square at the top of the ramp. So the second option is much the same as the first. That flat portion at the corner is depressed and is depressed maybe 3 inches, maybe in that range. We'd have to be a little bit concerned. I think the only concern we have is the intersection of 3rd and Main on the southwest corner. There's an access door to the building that's on the corner. In fact, he has a diagonal access to his door. We would want to have a unique design there to make sure we have the sidewalk flat in front of his doorway. We don't want a ramp in front of his doorway. So we would probably just push that flat area a little further each direction down Main Street and on 3rd to the west. The third option that I sketched up is the bump out option, which when I look at it in more detail, the bump out we showed on the original plan was just like this, a 2 foot bump out. They had a 10 foot radius on it, which when I looked at the detail, a 10 foot radius doesn't help you in that it pushes the furthest out point of that curb return to match where it was in the original 28 foot curb returns. So because you're smaller radius, it pushes the point out further into the road. So alternative to having enough depth to get the full ramp in without the landing and the ramps going in each direction is what our original hope was. We had intended to raise the grade, the street grade. So instead of a 6-inch exposure at the street, we would have brought the street up about 1.5 inches. And that gives us to where we have enough depth to get the ramp in without these side ramps. But now that layout that we gave you originally, I wouldn't support that. I would recommend, well, I'm not going to recommend this option either, but let's talk about this detail. This option is, it's got a 2 foot bump out and it was only to provide enough ramp length to not have to have the ramps around the corners. But after looking at the detail, I can't even accomplish that with this. So this is really, a bump out is not viable. We'll keep the bump outs out of any option that we do. So we'd recommend you accept the option to just use the state 10 foot curbs on the side streets and Main Street, and we'll put a 10 foot radius. And we go back to either option 1 or option 2. We can do dual ADA ramps or we can do single ADA ramps.
I think the dual makes the most sense because it points for those who are visually impaired, it points the direction of the ramp
Okay.
straight across the street. Whereas the one in the center, sometimes it can be confusing.
Yep.
After speaking with some visually impaired people in town here, they've identified the ones that point straight across the street as the best for them. So I think that accomplishes that. One question I had about where you identified the issue over on Third, with the building at an angle.
Yes.
If we, using this picture here,
Uh-huh.
if we basically are saying move these like to here and move them up or.
No, I thought what we would do is move the square that's got the arrow pointing towards the turning space, right there under your pen, straight under your pen.
Yeah.
To the left of that, to my left, that one. I thought we would move that over. If we have to move it over 4 feet, what we do is we would ramp the sidewalk down before we get to his triangular corner. So we'll ramp down, if we have to ramp down 3 inches, we'll ramp down 3 inches. And then we'll have the flat spot and then the flat spot continuing around the corner.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
and we can make that ramp down as long as we want. So it really won't be an obstruction. It doesn't have to be at the 7.5%, which is what these steep ADA ramps are. I mean, we could push it out to where there's 3 inches over 10 feet. So it'd be very gentle.
Sure.
So, I understand that, the straightaway, ramps are, easier for the seeing impaired, visually impaired. Where I see the second option is going to be a lot more friendly to, people in wheelchairs, alter able people walk with walkers. There's a lot more room there. It seems like there's a lot more space to make that corner turning. I'm not talking about crossing the road. I'm talking about turning down the next sidewalk, making that left-hand turn or right-hand turn.
Coming onto the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Right, right.
I'm just, putting that out there. That seems a lot more like there's more ease of access for somebody in a wheelchair. Regular wheelchair might not be, I think the motorized wheelchairs are a little wider and, that would be my concern on option one is, a busy morning or a busy day, on the, in downtown, just causing conflict with people in wheelchairs and walkers and stuff like that.
Let me say, one of the benefits of the diagonal ramp is that the stop sign, the crosswalks are closer to the intersection. So with the dual ramps, your stop sign, your crosswalks are further back from the cross street. So you can't see as well. They're a little more hidden.
So with this one, the crosswalk would be from the ramp.
Crosswalk with the center of the truncated dome, where the face of that curve, where the center of the truncated dome, you would have a line that goes east and one that goes north. Yeah, and so your continental crosswalks would be centered on that.
So we would be accomplishing I know it's not a huge distance, but it's a shorter crossing at that point.
No, it's really not a shorter crossing.
No.
We're combining, the other one's a shorter crossing by a
You're-
foot
yeah,
because
yeah,
you're around
okay,
the
that
corner.
makes sense.
Yeah, but you're consolidating the crosswalks in the intersection more. So the continental crosswalks would actually come together and kind of miter around the corner. They would come together and hit, whereas when they're individual, they're standalone. Yeah. So it probably allows you to put your stop sign maybe 10 feet closer to the intersection.
Okay, well,
I just want to chime in, I'm good with the dual ramps here as well too, especially ODOT requires dual ramps.
They do.
But you were saying not for smaller communities. Is there a threshold?
No, you'd really don't. If you have ODOT funding, they would push you to their stand. But even then, they let us do whatever we want to do. So we just use ODOT as a standard. ODOT has a very elaborate standard. In fact, it's continually changing. It takes a lot of study to even stay on top of what an acceptable ADA ramp is. They change it every 2 years and we just use it as a standard. So if we meet ODOT standard, then we're in good shape. If we're using some federal money or some state money, then you need to follow ODOT standard.
Gotcha. I'm good with the duals.
can I ask, what's the distance on that diagonal ramp? What's the distance between the corner, let's say that's a building, to the ramp starting on its descent?
5 feet.
5 feet.
We're mandated to make that 5 feet.
Okay,
So that ramp line would actually be back wherever that puts us at 5 feet from the building.
so 5 feet, because I'm thinking of Jerry's question, if we had a lot of people moving on that corner, would there be room to pass each other?
Well, recognize that the wheelchair would be on that 5-foot path, but normal pedestrian would be walking anywhere in that 10-foot wide sidewalk.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's,
Okay.
they wouldn't be walking in where the wheelchair is. Be
Okay.
plenty of room to pass, I think.
All right. Any other questions? Kurt?
Okay,
No?
well, okay, we'll go with the dual ramp, no
Yeah,
bump
dual
outs.
ramps,
I think that
looks
works good. Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, now the next thing I wanted to talk about was the turn lane on Fourth Avenue. And so I've given you a sketch that shows that turn lane. I used to have one, but it works well. We have 40 foot of curb to curb. Excuse me, I'm gonna grab one. We have 40 foot of curb to curb, so that's easy to allocate into 3 lanes. We would want to consider bike lanes. I would expect that on that road. I don't know if you want dedicated bike lanes or if you want a shared bike lane. But I had laid it out here with a 13-foot travel lanes in each direction and a 14-foot median. Plenty of room to have a dedicated right turn and a combination left turn and through lane. Now, I anticipate this will be a 4-way stop. So with that in mind, it maybe is not as important to have a right turn lane because everyone's going to come up, stop and go. They're not going to be held up by traffic. It'd be their turn as soon as someone at the intersection is gone. But it's wide enough to easily put a 3-lane turn section in that. We'd go back about 80 feet before we would swing the center line over to provide space for about 4 cars to back up at Main Street.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, while it's true that this 4-way stop would mean everybody stopping, but at the same time, if you have someone going straight, someone turning right, and you can stack that into 2 parts, it reduces the amount of traffic. And I know during like the mornings and stuff like that, that can get pretty heavy and people are going to work on the commute. So that's one reason why this is here. And I've seen this stack up pretty big. I mean, anyone that lives up there, I think Mayor, you live up there. Counselor Hughes, I think, lives up there. So they have some experience with that as well. My question primarily is about and we spoke a little earlier about this, about altering the driveway there slightly so that we can make sure that that stack lane has a little bit of sidewalk next to it,
Right.
but also people aren't cutting across that as well. And I wanted to present that to the council a little bit as well to make sure that everybody's in agreement with that. And what I'm talking about is, if you guys can see from over here, I'm gonna try to, where the driveway starts, take it back far enough where they can still have a driveway back here. But like kind of curve that out, put some trees in there so no one's cutting across that and still have enough room to come out of that area there. Mike, if you don't know if you see, you know what I'm talking about here. Okay. So I just want to make sure everybody else is in agreement with that. If they are, then we may try to work that out with them. So.
Very good. I think that works well. Nothing wrong with that. We'll meet with the property owners. I'll coordinate with whoever's going to meet with me and the property owners so that we can talk about the impacts to their properties.
Fair enough, Paul.
If we go with the turn lane here, does that remove the on-street parking from each side?
Yes. Yes, it does. So we'll talk about parking in a moment, but we're proposing to remove the on-street parking. If we elect to develop that parking area, we would remove the 4 spaces on the south side anyway. So the north side has some parallel parking, yes.
Hey, Jody?
Yeah, I am just gonna kind of piggyback off of what Counselor Licky said. I mean, just going down Fourth a lot. I see the benefit of adding that right turn lane. I think that's a good idea. I'm glad we're gonna have a conversation about parking because I know that's also another concern. And then my assumption is then we'd put like the double yellow line on the road where the current.
To separate the
You're
lanes.
right, make sure people aren't crossing over to
Yes.
get into Chapman's. Okay.
Well, and I think what was mentioned that we probably would want to landscape that or something so people don't, because they're going to cross the yellow line no matter what. The yellow line will go far enough back, the 80 feet, and then swerve into the center line.
Okay.
So we'll put some other type of barrier, a landscape barrier, I think would be nice, just to maybe even the first 15 feet with trees. They're going to recognize you need to turn, go down Fourth before they go into the driveway. So one of the constraints, I think, will be that he has head-in parking, I think, at his building towards the east.
Mm,
We'll need to work with him to make sure the driveway allows people to still head in parking. Or maybe he'll reconfigure his parking, but we'll work with him
Okay.
to find out something.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Oh, Melanie, go ahead.
Oh,
Could I
sorry.
just point out that the 13 and 14, I don't have it in front of me now, but there are 13 and 14-foot lanes. If we do that turn lane. And I think the lanes on Broadway are 12 feet, 12 or 13. And I know that's been a concern. So I just want to point out, and that's like where you're coming to a stop or and so it may be having them narrower isn't a concern, but I just wanted to highlight that if we do choose that option, it will feel more constrained when you're going, taking that right around from Main to go up Fourth. And as you're sitting in those lanes, it will feel tighter, which is, I'm sure that meets the standards, but I just didn't want it to catch people off guard.
Yeah, a standard ODOT lane would be 12 feet. So we can talk about how to allocate this 40. We can break it up differently if we want, maybe the median being 12 and the travel lanes to be 13 or 14. 14 and 12 would still meet our 40-foot allocation. Also, we may want to talk about what lane is the through lane. If the predominant number of cars are going northbound at that intersection, then maybe we want the configuration I've shown here, but if the predominant number of cars are going the other way, maybe we want to combine the through lane with the right turn lane. So whichever has a fewer traffic, we would combine the through lane. The through lane being in the outside lane would be a little bit better when we're trying to get back into the alignment of Fourth Avenue west of Main Street.
Gotcha.
All right, Jerry.
So I just want to bring to everybody's attention that this was the intersection where the fire truck turned in the Traffic and Public Safety Committee's demonstration out there. And I don't remember what the measurements were with the street before with the bump outs, but it just seems like that 13-foot roadway fire truck would have this very similar issue turning right onto Fourth.
Yes,
So-
that's true. They would. I think maybe a better allocation might be 14, 12 and 14. Let the center lane have the 12 and the two outside lanes be 14, give them a little more room to swing around corners. But it's still going to be tight and it's still tighter than what the fire department would like to have. Yes.
So,
I'd actually, Counselor Ten Bush beat me to it. I was going to actually mention that as I was looking at it. Also wonder if it would make sense to do 2 12s and add 2 more feet onto that on the lane going up the hill. So that way, because when they're turning in, you might give them that extra distance or it might not. We'd have to probably work with the fire department to confirm that. And I would probably maybe see if we can have a conversation before we finally do a final approval. Because as most fire departments, what they're going to do, if they're going to turn right there, they're going to pull up, block both lanes coming down the hill to turn right. Then that's what they're going to do there. But coming into it would be probably the biggest concern as Councilor Ten Bush pointed out. And I'm not sure if even 2 more feet is going to meet that. So I'd really kind of be curious to what they say.
Well, we could actually put 4 more feet on it. We could go 12, 12 and 16. So if we wanted to put all 16 at the south side, that would certainly, you would feel very spacious as you're going around the corner in 16. I would still expect they would pull into the left turn lane. So if people are in the left turn lane and a fire truck is coming from Main Street, I would expect they're going to pull over to the right. And now there would be room to pull over to the right and you'll have 16 and 12, you'll have 28 feet of street lane for the truck to get around. And it still may not be enough. We'll coordinate with Sarah to find out what her thoughts are, but I know whatever we do, it's tight.
Yeah.
But I think if you want to push as much to that south side, we could go 16, 12 and 12.
I know we're going to chat about parking later, but from my standpoint, the loss of parking here is a big deterrent for me wanting to do with this. I feel like having a 4-way stop there is automatically going to address some of the issues of the flow of folks coming down already. I'd be fine with just 2 lanes over there without having the stacked lanes or the turn lane there. We haven't decided on the parking yet, but if we're going to be only gaining maybe 3 spots if we put the money into that other area there. It just doesn't seem worth it from my standpoint.
We can always restripe this to 3-lane. If we want to build it as 2-lane now, it's just a matter of restriping it later. We want to, in fact, we could even in the field determine how best to allocate that if we decide to go to 3 lanes. So if you're hesitant, we could go with 2-lane now, and we're certainly not going down a path that commits us to anything.
No, we're short on time, so I'll make it quick. My question is, we're talking about all this additional parking on the street. I think the question I'm gonna have here is, what particular businesses are those besides the 1700 building, State Farm? And I think that's it. Is it actually going to be particularly benefiting that doesn't already have a parking lot in it? Because Ace Hardware has one, the Growlers have their own parking lot, Chapman's has its own parking lot, Tapatio, Yo Treats, Chevron, the City Hall, they all have their own parking lot with plenty of parking spots. What do we, the only two places we're actually benefiting from those are 1700 and State Farm, and there's a lot of on-street parking as it is already for that building. So 3 more spots is great, but there's not a lot of places that actually need all that additional on-street parking because there's so many other parking lots that they can share as it is. So that's my question. I mean, I know I know you don't, you only have on-street parking for State Farm, and the 1700, besides the people that live there, only has the on-street parking. So I get that.
Clackamas River Growlers is another area that fills up the street as well too. So it's in Ace Hardware, even they'll park along the street as well. So it's a busy street. And I think parking's a concern down here.
Let's talk about parking, my last component, if you're ready for that. 'Cause we're running out of my time, your time, rather. So I'm going to conclude on the 3-lane. Let's just keep it as 2-lane now, and later we'll reconvene and decide how we want to do it after it's built. We take a look at it. So the parking, the last handout I brought for you, we looked at that vacant lot that's listed for sale on the south side of 4th Avenue. And we've laid out 3 configurations, I think, as how you could do that. So the first configuration we show on the plans, you can see we've shown angled straight in parking. So it's 90-degree parking. We can provide 9 or 10 spaces there. You lose 4 that are currently on street parking on that side. So you're gaining 5 or 6 parking spaces. We anticipate the cost would be in the $40,000 to $50,000, the cost to develop that parking lot, plus the purchase of the land. So whatever the land would be negotiated to purchase. A second option on this handout is parallel parking. Let me go to the third option first. And angle parking is what kind of, I think everyone anticipated we might be able to do angle parking in there. There simply isn't enough room to do angle parking. So it's just way too tight. So we've shown angle parking. I think we've pushed the curb out into the street a little further. It's only got a narrow 4-foot sidewalk now. We'd want a bigger sidewalk if we were rebuilding that block. But we've got 15.5 feet for the stall depth and 14.5 feet for travel. It's too small. It's just too small to get that in there. In fact, the 15.5 and the 14, that's 30 feet. That's already 5 feet past the property line. Property line is only 25 feet wide. So then the third option is, if you look at the second handout, we could do parallel parking in there. We could retain the parallel parking on the street, and we could add 4 off-site parking, parallel parking, which to me is very expensive for minimal parking improvements, frankly. The cover page has some summary of the impacts of those parking options. And I think it's a summary of let me walk down them real quickly, I guess. These 2-foot bump outs, I recommend we just abandon that, and you will not see it again. We're going to modify this drawing and get it off. Pamplin Media Group asked for a copy of this for their next paper. So I'm going to modify this drawing to show it the way we're talking tonight. And then I'll email it to them. So that'll be in the paper in a couple of weeks. We need to talk still about 4-way stop signs at the 2 intersections. I believe the city may be working with DKS on the feasibility of having 4-way stops at 3rd and 4th. So I'll work with Melanie on that. The road widths, you can see Main Street's 44 feet wide, curb to curb. At 3rd, it's 38 because we're only doing the wider sidewalk, 10-foot sidewalk on the south side. The north side, we're leaving the sidewalk alone. So the north side is wider than the south side. And then at Fourth Street, we're 36 feet, so it's 18 feet on each side. And I don't recognize that number after talking with you, about 20 feet on each side. So I think we're looking at between Broadway and, I don't even know that. I think it's 20 feet on each lane. So I think it's 40-foot curb to curb on Fourth Avenue. It's probably the same on Third Avenue. So street trees, Amy has prepared a summary. Just we've got 8 trees shown, 16 street lights, about 5,700 feet of paving. So the way this configuration has been modified is much more economical for you. We will be essentially salvaging the bulk of that street. We're going to be rebuilding the sidewalks because we'll be putting conduit underground to underground all the power. So you'll have new sidewalks on both sides. There's a few spots of existing sidewalk that, or rather new sidewalk that's been put in recently that we will work to salvage if they fit the configuration. So I haven't prepared a cost estimate for you, but I will. I'll go back and modify this design to incorporate the things we've talked about. Show the detail of these curb returns and ADA ramps and show just 2-lane and parking. I guess I need your feedback on what you think. And it's not something we need to decide tonight, that the parking on the south side of Fourth Avenue. So sorry, last month we had a 1.5 hour meeting. Today we had a half-hour meeting and I
You did good.
took more than a half an hour.
Good. Here.
So I don't know if this is the right spot to ask this question, but so Saturday, my wife and I went and had lunch downtown. We parked on Fourth Avenue next to the Chinese food restaurant. I got out and I know I'm kind of chubby, but I'm not a very big guy. But I stepped out onto the curb and a chunk of the curb went off with my foot when I stepped there. So would it be feasible to redo the curb on Fourth, just, during this project? I mean, it's because that curb is in really, really bad shape.
We're going to be saving money.
Third,
It
yeah.
depends on whether it's in the, excuse me,
Third Avenue.
well, Third and Fourth, both, I think,
Yeah.
have the same issue.
Yeah, Third is that's where I thought I was losing my life.
We'd want to check and see if the urban renewal district includes that, which I expect it does. We're saving a lot of money on Main Street. And we will be doing construction on Third and Fourth because when we did the undergrounding on Broadway, they carried those underground condos over to a mid-block pole. Now that we're going to underground Main Street, they're going to want to get rid of the mid-block pole. And we're going to go underground all the way from Broadway to Main. So chances are we tear all that up and put new sidewalk anyway.
Okay.
So we can plan on that and try to allocate the money for it. I think that'd work fine.
As far as jumping back to parking real quick, I think it makes sense for the straight end parking. Maybe with some a little bit wider or something like that, but at nine spaces is much better than that. But the biggest thing is I think they would have to be wider so larger trucks and things can turn in there and stuff. So
We've
that way
shown
we
them
don't-
at 10. I've shown them at 10, which a narrow lot that everyone would hate are 8-footers. 9-footers are spacious and 10 would be very easy. Maybe approaching Costco style.
Gonna say
parking.
Costco.
Yeah. Costco parking's great. Yeah. Okay, so
And we don't need to decide on parking tonight,
Right,
right?
that's right.
Because it seems like there's a process that we would need to go through as well
Yes.
too, to acquire the
Right,
land.
certainly.
So we could. I've got my thoughts on it, but I think from tonight's standpoint, we could probably end the parking and make sure you get what you need on Main Street. Is that fair?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we're all on the same page.
I think I've got good directions. I'll revise the plan. I'll send it out to you and I'll come back at the next meeting or next month, whenever you want to come back and we'll have more details.
Great, thank you, Kurt. We
Thank you.
appreciate your presentation.
Okay.
And thanks staff for putting that together and it's well thought out, so thank you. And what else do we got on here? The next citizen and community group comment, I have none. Board member comments, any on the table? If you go around, no? Okay, that's it. We will adjourn this meeting. Give me about